The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. Chapter 1, Tom Skips Out and In. Tom! No answer. Tom! No answer. Where is that boy, I wonder? You, Tom! The old lady pulled her glasses down and opened over them and around the room. Then she put them up and looked out under them. She seldom or never looked through them for so small a thing as a boy. She looked puzzled for a moment and then said, "Well, if I ever get a hold of you, I'll—" She didn't finish, for by this time she was bending down and punching under the bed with a broom. She stirred up nothing but the cat. I never did see the like of that boy. She went to look out the doorway. No Tom. So she lifted up her voice to aim for distance and shouted, "You, Tom!" There was a slight noise behind her, and she turned around just in time to seize a small boy by the loose end of his jacket and stop his flight. "There! I might have looked in that closet. What have you been doing in there?" "Nothing." "Nothing? Look at your hands and look at your mouth. What is that stuff?" "I don't know, Aunt." "Well, I know. It's jam, and that's what it is. 40 times. I've told you, if you don't let that jam alone, I'll skin you. Hand me that stick." "My! Look behind you, Auntie." The old lady whirled around, and the lad fled on an instant, climbed up the high-board fence of the backyard, and disappeared over it. Tom's Aunt Polly stood surprised for a moment and then broke into a gentle laugh. That boy. What can I ever learn anything? He plays enough tricks on me like that for me to be looking out for him by this time. But my goodness, he never plays two alike. And how's a body to know what's coming? But he is my dead sister's boy, and I haven't the heart to whip him. He'll stay out now in a long time, and then I'll be obliged to make him work tomorrow to punish him. It's a mighty hard to make him work on Saturday when all the boys are out playing, but he hates work more than he hates anything else, and I've got to do my duty or I'll spoil him. Tom did stay out late, and he had a very, very good time. He got back home just in time to help Jim, the young black handyman, saw the wood for the next day. At least Tom was there in time to tell the adventures to Jim, while Jim did 3/4 of the work. Tom's younger brother, or rather half-brother, Sid, was already finishing up his work of picking up the chips, for Sid was a quiet boy and had no daring ways, just the opposite of Tom. While Tom was eating his supper and stealing extra sugar cubes whenever he could, Aunt Polly asked him questions to find out if he had been in school all day. She said, "Tom, it was warm in school, wasn't it?" "Yes'm." "Very warm, wasn't it?" "Yes'm." "Didn't you want to go swimming, Tom?" A bit of fear shot through Tom. Did she know? He searched Aunt Polly's face, but it told him nothing. So he said, "No, well, not very much." The old lady reached out her hand and felt Tom's shirt and said, "But you aren't too warm now, though." "Some of us pumped water on our heads. At the town pump. See, mine's damp yet." "Tom, you didn't have to open your shirt collar where I sewed it to pump water on your head, did you? Open your jacket." Tom opened his jacket, and the shirt collar was still sewed. "Well, all right. I thought surely you had gone into school or have left school today and have been a swimming. But I forgive you, Tom, this time." But Sidney said, "Well, now, I thought you sewed that collar with white thread, but it's black." "Why, I did sew it with white, Tom." But Tom did not wait. He went out the door, and as he left, he said, Siddy, I will beat you for that." In a safe place, Tom examined the thread. It was black, and he said to himself, "She would never have noticed if it hadn't been for Sid. Sometimes she sews it with white, and sometimes she sews it with black. I wish you would just stick to one or the other. I can't keep track of them, but I'll get Sid for that." Within 2 minutes, or even less, Tom had forgotten all his troubles. He was interested in a new way of whistling that sounded like a bird. After practice, he learned and went whistling down the street with his mouth full of music. The evening was early. It was not dark yet. Presently, Tom checked his whistle. A stranger was before him. It was a boy, a little larger than himself, who had just moved into the village. Tom looked him over. The boy was well dressed. He wore a cap and a blue jacket. He had shoes on, and it was only Friday. He even wore a necktie. He looked like a city boy. Neither boy spoke, and if one moved, the other moved, but only sideways and in a circle. They kept face to face and eye to eye at all times. Finally, Tom said, I can lick you. I'd like to see you try. Well, I can do it. No, you can't. Yes, I can. You can't. I can. You can't. There was a pause. And then Tom said, What's your name? It's none of my business. Well, I'll make it my business. Well, why don't you then? If you say much, I will. Much, much, much. There now. Oh, you think you're mighty smart, don't ya? I could lick you with one hand tied behind me if I wanted to. Well, why don't you do it then? You say you can do it. Well, I will if you fool with me, said Tom. Well, why don't you do it then? What do you keep saying it for? Why don't you just do it? Because you're afraid? I'm not afraid, said Tom. You are. I'm not. You are. There was another pause and more moving around. Presently, they were shoulder to shoulder, and Tom said, Get away from here. Get away yourself. I won't either. Tom drew a line in the dust and said, I dare you to step over that, and I will lick you till you can't stand up. The new boy stepped over the line at once and said, Let's see you do it. Don't you crowd me now. You better look out, said Tom. Well, you said you'd do it. Why don't you do it? By jingo, for 2 cents, I will do it. The new boy reached into his pocket and took out 2 pennies. Tom struck them to the ground, and in an instant both boys were rolling and fighting in the dirt. For a minute, they tugged and tore and punched and scratched at each other. Presently, the mix-up, and Tom appeared seated on the new boy and pounding him with his fists. Holler enough, said Tom. The boy only struggled to free himself. He was crying mainly with rage. Holler enough! The boy went on, and at last the stranger got out a weak enough. And Tom let him up and said, Now that'll teach you. Better look out who you're fooling with next time. The new boy went off, brushing the dust from his clothes and crying that he'd get even with Tom. Tom only made fun of him and started for home. But as soon as Tom's back was turned, the new boy picked up a rock and threw it and hit Tom between the shoulders. Then the new boy turned and ran like a deer. Tom chased him home and thus found out where the new boy lived. Tom waited at the gate for some time, daring his enemy to come outside, but the enemy only made faces at him through the window, and at last the boy's mother appeared and called Tom a bad boy and ordered him to go away. So he went away, but Tom said he'd get that new boy. Tom got home pretty late that night, and as he tried to sneak in through the window, Aunt Polly caught him. When she saw the clothes from the fight, she made up her mind to put him to work the next day, Saturday.